Crave was conceived as a way to deliver our strong educational mission and our membership's desire for their continued learning. Through the Crave series, our chapter will deliver webinars and virtual meetings to deliver timely and relevant topics that are affecting our industry today.
It's about the effort that we expend to connect with people. But you have an opportunity to see people, you have an opportunity to chat with people. We may not have an opportunity to have appetizers and share a drink with each other, but we stay connected, and that's really the most important thing.
Being able to work together and learn together in a new format, a new environment, really helped us take those pre-existing relationships and friendships that I had to another level.
CoreNet has taken the leadership in these kinds of conversations for years and years, and so we're delighted to have this long-term relationship with CoreNet.
I found the CoreNet to be a great community of dedicated real estate professionals, and what it means to me is it gives me a wider network of people with whom to share ideas, to derive the best learnings, to test and experiment with things that I'm working on.
This program is all about personal growth and becoming the leader that you want to be.
CoreNet has always led the way when it comes to supporting the professional development of our members. Our roundtable discussions, our education workshops, and our professional development programs are just part of what makes CoreNet so valuable to our members. It was critical for us to find a way to still be able to facilitate all of this. Crave has provided us the platform to be just as effective and to still provide that value to our members in a virtual environment.
CoreNet not only provides a platform for different groups to come together regardless where you come from in terms of organization, but really help each member to feel like they belong in this organization.
We have a diverse membership base, and you will find that members come from all walks of life and from all over the world. However, it's still an area of focus for us to improve upon and to embrace equity, inclusion, and diversity through increasing awareness and taking action, as we know this will lead to more success for the organization and for our members.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine Sanford from Liberty Mutual and also co-chair of the Career Strategies and Development Committee, along with Aaron Miller of Smith Group. I also serve on our chapter's board of directors and would like to welcome everyone to our program this afternoon, Maintaining Company Culture. So we'll begin with a few announcements. You can see here we've got a number of upcoming seminars, Crave webinars. We have a second one this week, What's Next for Workplace Wellness. Next week on Monday, the CoreNet Eastern Regional Symposium. On May 18th, our Young Leaders Access Lunch with Jean Nutt from Gensler. May 25th is Bar Instead of Room, Bar Zoom Trivia. And May 27th is Creating the Wow Factor. So just want to take a few minutes to highlight the Eastern Regional Symposium next week. We have some information here on our Young Leaders Forum, which is Reframe Your Future from 12 to 1:15. A session spotlight, Reframe City Level. Another one, Reframe Corporate Level. And Reframe Individual Level. Some great speakers and presenters for those sessions. I'll turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, Catherine. Again, welcome everyone today. Thank you for choosing to spend your lunch hour with us. We know your time is precious. If you have additional time, please engage with us on social media. And if you're not already, please do follow our CoreNet New England LinkedIn company page, and it contains information as well on all of the upcoming events and resources as well. Also, thank you to our sponsors. Without all of you, none of this would be possible. Sticking through this year has been really challenging, and it's critical to us to make sure that we can maintain this programming. So our platinum as well as our gold sponsors, thank you for all of you do. And without further delay, I'd like to hand it over to our committee teammates, Janet Mora and Karen Bertain. Janet is with Margulies Peruzzi. Karen is with BlackRock, and they've worked really hard to put together a really fantastic discussion today with some incredible panelists on maintaining company culture. As always for these, if you have questions or just would like to engage in a lively dialogue, please type your thoughts and questions into chat, and Karen and Janet will make sure that there's time at the end to field your questions to the panelists. So Karen and Janet, why don't you kick us off? Thank you both for supporting this effort. It's very appreciated.
Great. Thank you, Erin. We have three great panelists today. We have Amanda Clark, who's Associate Project Manager, Real Estate Delivery at Liberty Mutual. We have John Savello, VP Global Real Estate and Workplace Productivity at Akamai, and Andrea Marin, Associate at Wolf, Greenfield and Sachs. Each of them are going to spend a few minutes talking about culture at their company in particular, and then we'll have some questions and opportunity for you to ask questions as well. Culture has always been important in companies, but really never more so than in the past year when we're all working remotely. And now looking at what will most likely be hybrid work for most of us, again, there's a lot of emphasis on it. So we'd like to ask Amanda first, maybe just take a minute to talk a little bit more about yourself and what you do at Liberty Mutual, and then you can share your slides and talk a little bit about where culture is going.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. Amanda Clark, I'm on our real estate project management team, and I primarily work on our international portfolio and small domestic projects. So my day-to-day job doesn't involve culture work, but I was on a cross-functional team that piloted a culture building program for our real estate department. So I thought I'd start this presentation by just giving a quick overview of culture at Liberty as a whole, and then focus in on that work that I participated in. So move to the next slide, great. So if you can look past the wet teddy bear commercial Liberty's currently running, it's a great company that works hard to create and maintain a positive and inclusive culture. So Liberty's common purpose is to help people embrace today and confidently pursue tomorrow. And we accomplish that through our values. So they're put people first, keep it simple, be open, make things better, and act responsibly. So these values really come to life through various programs and initiatives. Just to name a few, we have employee resource groups, or ERGs, where employees can connect with others with commonalities or as allies. We also have a strong charity program, Torchbearers, which provides opportunities for employees to donate and volunteer together. And we also already had a flexible workplace prior to COVID, which helped to make the transition to work from home go a bit more smoothly, since we were used to working and communicating online already. So while these broader Liberty programs affect things like work-life balance and community, they don't drill these values down into the culture of individual organizations and how they do their work. So that's our job. You can move to the next slide, please. So prior to COVID, our department conducted a culture survey, which identified the greatest areas for improvement were around making progress over perfection and innovation, which tie back to the values of keeping it simple and making things better. So to address these opportunities, a goal was set to develop a growth mindset and coaching culture where perfection is not expected and where innovation can be pursued. Great goal that could really propel an organization forward, but then COVID hit. So after a brief pause, this work did end up rising back to the top of our leaders' priority list. And I came into the team at that time. So after first wondering what the heck growth mindset meant, my second thought was, why now? We're all apart in our homes and adjusting to a new world. Was this the right time to try to change our culture in this way? While this wasn't a direct response to COVID, in retrospect, it really did end up providing valuable lessons in adaptability and brought the group together for meaningful discussions that I think ultimately helped us navigate through this time more effectively. Our timing was also influenced by Liberty's Global Leadership Learning and Talent organization that had a program that was ready to be piloted called Embracing a Feedback Culture. And it was primarily made up of short videos and guides from the Neuro Leadership Institute, and we rolled that out over a 10-week period. Next slide, please. So without diving into the specifics of the content too much, it really began with educating about growth and fixed mindsets. So someone with a fixed mindset believes it's hard or impossible to change, while those with a growth mindset are always looking to improve by taking on new challenges, risks, and they embrace that change. So the content provided skills to help shift people's mindsets and continue to learn and grow through asking for feedback, with the ultimate goal to help develop habits around asking for and offering feedback that will ultimately influence our organization and its culture going forward. Next slide. So engagement was difficult due to, of course, many competing priorities last year. So instead of just rolling the program out as is, we catered the content to our department, creating our own materials that referenced our culture as it existed. So for instance, providing suggestions on how to work concepts into our existing team meetings, which we call huddles. One silver lining of working virtually was that it allowed everyone to have the same opportunity for engagement despite their geography. We didn't run into situations where some people were together in the office and others were dialing in from home. And the biggest lesson for me came from the content itself, to really be flexible, embrace that growth mindset, and ask for feedback throughout the process. So some of the best feedback we received was from a woman who just retired at the end of April. She reluctantly completed this training, not expecting to gain much from it at the end of her career. But she said to us that it was eye-opening for her to discover that she had a fixed mindset. And the course really made her realize that her fear of failure held her back from trying new things. So she was able to finish up a project she'd been putting off and said she felt great pride in that. And some feedback required us to shift our plans. We had just started using Teams and set up a site that we updated with blog posts and conversation starters, thinking we'd get a good dialogue going there. That method worked well for an IT group that also piloted this program. But by practicing what we're preaching and asking for feedback often, we found that the posts weren't resonating with the group, and we were able to pivot and try something else midstream. So we created manager huddles where the conversations we were hoping to have over Teams could happen real time. These ended up being so successful for sharing stories and best practices that our team was asked to create content to keep them going. So we created a tool filled with TED Talks, podcasts, even a drawing class along with conversation topics to keep the concepts of growth mindset, innovation, and feedback fresh on managers' minds. And they're invited to share those learnings and content with their teams. So in order to carry this forward and ensure accountability, our culture goals were added to the department's objectives, and the content will also be included as part of our onboarding experience for new hires. So there will also continue to be an annual culture survey where we can measure our success on improving these categories. In the end, it was a successful pilot, and we were able to offer some great advice to pass on to future program users. And I'm really glad we were able to continue on with this work despite the pandemic. Even though it was difficult to add more to people's plates, it really was successful in shifting mindsets, which ultimately leads to a more adaptable and innovative group. That's it.
Thank you, Amanda. And now let's switch to John Savello from Akamai.
Good day, everybody.
Just wait for a second for your slide. Maybe if you want to just talk about yourself for a minute while we wait for your slides to come up.
Sure, I'm John Savello. I'm the Vice President of Workplace Productivity and Real Estate at Akamai. I've been with the company for about 18 months. I started shortly before the pandemic hit, so it's been quite a ride over the last 18 months. But we can go to the next slide. I can get into some details about the company just real quick. It's been around for almost 25 years, 8,000 employees in 30 countries. We do content delivery and network security, 50 plus global office locations, but our major hubs are in Cambridge, Bangalore, Krakow, and Costa Rica. Those 4 sites make up approximately 65% of the total headcount. The other sites are all primarily sales offices and some sites that we've brought in through acquisition, and revenues this year will be slightly over $3 billion. Next slide, please. So in the middle of last summer, when it became apparent that the pandemic would be with us for a while, we made a determination to start a future of work project. It's a cross-functional team that I lead, where we started to think about how we will work in the new world, like we're all struggling with. And we engaged a consulting firm that you're all familiar with that has 2 letters, and we brought them on, and we started with a survey exercise around our culture. Akamai does have a very strong and unique culture, but they had never done a progressive or comprehensive survey on what that really means. So we did that in Q4 of last year, and this is a readout slide. I'm not going to drain this whole thing, but we had 60% participation, and it was representative of all the major job functions and divisions. And we found that we had a very healthy and strong culture. You can see those boxes on the left in orange. Those are 5 of our 7 Akamai core values that came back to us as very positive traits that people responded to in the survey. They were allowed to pick 25 traits out of a large collection. I think it was over 50. And you can see that, 49%, half the people chose collaborative, 48% chose a customer first. So you can see there's a large percentage of positive traits, only a couple of negative traits, overworked and stuck in our ways. I'm going to suggest that overworked was potentially a reaction to the pandemic. I'm sure we've all been dealing with that. So we had been in the pandemic state for about 10 months when we actually released the survey. So I'm not suggesting that wouldn't be the top negative trait without the pandemic, but I think that was definitely a factor on that. And stuck in our ways and overworked, resistant to change, bureaucratic. These are all negative traits that did pop up through the survey that wasn't a shock to us, but and obviously areas that we need to work on and improve upon. Next slide, please. So this is a further breakdown of the way people view the culture, all very positive until you get to number 15, which is overworked, like we talked about, and then stuck in our ways was number 20. So it was really insightful to see that there's general alignment on what the positive aspects are in terms of the culture and what people appreciate with the company. So it was helpful. And then also directionally, I think it validated our our concern or our point of view that we could move to a more distributed work model, which is what we're going to do long term. So really the reason for this effort was to make sure that our culture was strong enough to be able to thrive, or certainly minimally retain this culture when we move to a more distributed model, which is what we're expecting to do next year. Next slide, please. So I was hesitant to put pandemic response in here, but I have to say everything we do in the real estate group at Akamai now is reflected in some way by the lens of the pandemic. So just quickly, just like everyone else, we sent everyone home. We've given guidance that no one needs to return until January of next year at the earliest. We won't be doing any corporate travel to potentially Q4 in some regions. We did do a $600 home office allowance last year, so people could get the proper equipment that they needed to function. And then this year we did another $600 work-life balance, which is really an allowance that can be used for pretty much anything. We did get a lot of requests last year for everything from wellness support gym memberships. In Europe, we got a lot of requests about buying air conditioners. Well, we came up with a more progressive program this year that people can use the money to get those things that they need once we realize that we'd be in this condition for another year. Akamai Wellness Days. So we introduced 7 new scheduled days off, which are great. As you know, when you take a day off nowadays, you still get 150 emails, but when we have company-wide wellness days, everyone is off, and there's an expectation that you're not going to be doing work or pinging people on those days unless you have a true emergency. And we created an internal compassion fund, which was really well received, where employees can make contributions, and the company matches those contributions, and the money is used to support employees that are struggling. We've since released another version of this, now specifically targeted on India, a country where we have over 2,000 employees. Next slide. So how are we dealing with cultural retention? We don't have a formal program around culture. We don't have a culture evangelist within the company. It's really something that the HR group and the leaders in HR are doing by default. But we've been very upfront with our employees throughout the process that things are going to change, especially with the workplace strategy. Like I said, we've created this cross-functional project. We've released several surveys asking for people's feedback. We've had focus groups with all the major divisions to get their ask questions and get their perspectives on what a new highly distributed work model will be. We have executive leadership. We have executive steering committee that's overseeing the project and giving us some credibility. And the team meets on a regular basis weekly to work through the work stream activities that are happening. We're thinking we'll be launching the program formally in Q4 and launching it early next year. And that lines up with our guidance on remote work. But we're redefining how offices will be viewed and utilized. We're going to have a whole new concept about what the workplace will be like, an Akamai office, what it will do. Obviously, huge change management dependencies here. So we have an internal group that does change management, but we'll be augmenting that with frankly, with a third party that will help us. And our intent is to do most of the information and cascading on this issue and this transition through Q3 and Q4 of this year. There's an awareness that there'll be variability by generations, obviously, and by geo. Not everyone works the same way. We know that, and we won't have the same rate of adoption, frankly, in some parts of APJ that we'll have in the Americas. And in growth mindset, so we've been doing that training within the company for the last 24 months. It started pre-pandemic, and I think we're in the voice module now. So we have the benefit of the fact that everyone in the company is going through that training, which is going to be something we can leverage heavily as we move through this transition. Next slide. And then just quickly, I just added this part of the survey we did was to try to get people's perspectives on how they want to work going forward. So as you can see, like everyone else, we have a high percentage of employees that want to work in a hybrid fashion a few times a week, and then once a week and not at all. You can see we're pushing, I think, 86% of that point of people that want to have a different relationship with their workplace than they had prior to the pandemic. So on one slide, this is an example of the change that we're anticipating and what we're preparing for. And we can make all the real estate changes and implement all that, but how do we retain a culture, and how do people feel that they're still connected to a broader organization? That's a challenge that we recognize. I don't have all the answers, but I'm hoping I can pick some up today through this program.
Thank you, John. And actually, before we shift to Andrea, I think there's a question in the Q&A that specifically for you. Karen, do you want to check that?
Sure. Yeah, John, a question's come in. So did Akamai see a difference in overall responses to its survey on a country by country basis?
I had anticipated that we would see that, and we specifically structured the program where we get the cuts by office and by country. And the answer is, I was shocked that we didn't see a lot of variability. Honestly, I think we probably would have saw more variability if we had done it by generation, and we did do it, but we couldn't ask how old people were. So we wound up coming up with these tranches of age. So we did see variability in the generational aspect. And clearly younger workers have different expectations than folks that are in the mid or toward the end of their career. So we did see some variability there, but by geo, it was not significant in terms of the cultural pillars that the company is built upon. When you see that last slide about how do you want to work, there we did see some variability. We saw more desire for mobility in North America than we saw in Europe and Asia. And that was not a shock to us, but that validated our assumptions going in. But when you got to the actual culture and the traits, it was very consistent across all the geos.
Thank you. And I just want to mention to the audience that rather than wait to the end to take your questions, we want to try to do them as they're relevant to what we're talking about. So please go ahead and ask questions and Karen will pose them. So let's go to Andrea Marin now. Maybe Andrea, while we're pulling your slides up, if you want to just tell us a little bit about your role.
Sure. So I feel like I'm offering a slightly different perspective to the culture conversation. I am an IP attorney at Wolf Greenfield and Sachs. And the reason that I am part of this conversation, I am the culture deputy for our group. And the firm, obviously there's a lot of firm-wide initiatives, but each of the practice groups have a dedicated deputy. And we look to forge those relationships both within our group specifically and then across the groups to supplement the initiatives that the firm have. Obviously, their core values being mutual respect, wanting to maintain our collegial environment and family, and our job, separate and apart from being lawyers, or try to implement that. And it's been a wild experiment this past year in the midst of a pandemic to try and figure out what does culture mean, not just at a firm level, but with the people that you work most closely with, and how do you make sure that we feel connected in the midst of this separate feeling. We do have two offices in Boston and New York, although the majority of us are in Boston. And so I guess I am offering suggestions on sort of what to do and what to think about, both on a, I would say probably a more micro level. And at the interest of simplicity, we're going to start with this one. And it's probably something that folks think about, but creativity. And it's been a very interesting experience to fail miserably when you come up with ideas that you think are going to be successful. And I know everyone has probably tried them, the happy hours, and it works really well for some folks, but for others it didn't. I would say the one thing that had been the most surprising, we started doing trivia, and not knowing how folks are going to respond, it was trying a lot of different things. And trivia for us has been, a group at least, something where everyone has really launched into it, and it's been somewhat structured and different to larger initiatives and activities, but it's a way that you can very easily get together, every other week, do something that's silly, and has brought folks together in a way that was somewhat surprising. If you had asked me what types of activities I thought were going to be the most receptive to our group, I don't know that that would have been one I thought of, but you try, because we're all apart and we have to find some way to connect. Other things we did, more formal events, we did gingerbread house making, we've done beer tasting, we've tried a lot of different things. And part of it is asking, in addition to being creative. You can go to the next one as well, but soliciting feedback, both in a very large scale, trying to understand what culture means to each person in the group and as a firm, but then also what things they would like to try. And that's part of it, understanding that culture doesn't necessarily mean group events. I think that holistically, when we start to figure out a way to bring people together, we assume it's going to be a happy hour or a group event or something that we're all doing together. But part of this is being reminded that even apart, we are still part of the same culture, working towards a shared goal, and having this. And so both on the firm level and on the group level, we've done, and I think it's something that the other panelists have mentioned, but activities that folks can do with their families or with other folks that they're with. So whether it be a movie night that we're sending, or a care package, something to remind everyone, both again on the group level and the firm level, that we are all in this together. If you can go to the next slide. And then I think the thing that sometimes gets lost, and I've seen both when I think about culture on a firm level and within the groups, and then also just how we work with others, there's a lot of change. And I would fashion and I would ask everyone for their own experiences to think about this, how many Zoom calls or Teams meetings you had pre-pandemic. And when we talk about not being connected and shifting to this remote environment where we are trying to figure out a way to feel connected, even though we're all separate, we've moved to these platforms. And pre-COVID, I would say they probably weren't used quite as much. And although it seems very bizarre when I say this, in some ways, there's been connectivity born out of accessibility and just a shift in everyone's use of this technology. So moving away from teleconferences to in-person, although remote, but face-to-face meetings. And it's been a great way to check in, again, both within the group individually, but then outside the firm, and to maintain that culture and to show folks that we are still connected and together. So I'm offering somewhat of a different perspective. Again, culture is not what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And I get to talk with my group mates to understand from them what we would like to move forward, both again within the group, trying to figure out ways to connect with other groups within the firm, and then just experimenting and understanding that some things that you try are going to fail, some things are going to work spectacularly, and you're going to find out that you have a very competitive group who loves trivia. And then just not forgetting that the technology that we have that has become somewhat of a joke in a way, because there's more technological challenges on a day-to-day basis than we'd like to admit, but it creates opportunities to maintain that culture. And starting meetings by asking how someone's doing and not just thinking of it as a meeting to check another item off your list. I think those touch points and maintaining that relationship, although we're apart, can be very effective. So those are my few minutes, my few thoughts to start with.
Thank you, Andrea. So we have some questions for the panelists. Some of you may have touched on these points a little bit while you were talking, but here's an opportunity to maybe go into a little more detail. We also want to encourage the audience to please ask questions. And Karen will be keeping an eye on the Q&A so that we can answer them kind of while we're on the same topic. So for the three of you, we know obviously that all of our organizations are heading towards a hybrid workforce, at least for the next couple of years, probably. What do you think workplace rituals and events that you maybe have done in the past will start to look like as we move forward? Amanda, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was, what first came to mind for me was really what just Andrea spoke about with the virtual connection we've all gained through this, and how it may be difficult returning to office, balancing that in-office population and the people who are at home. So kind of tying it back to the content I was working on, I think just really being mindful of the disconnect that can happen there when we do start to return, and asking for feedback along the way, specifically on that topic, to make sure people are feeling included no matter where they're working from, and being ready to try new things and approach meetings in different ways when we're coming at it from different some on technology, some not, some in person. So.
If I can just sort of tack onto that a little bit, I think one interest in terms of feedback, but one thing that I've been thinking about pre-COVID, we had a lot of events that we would go to, and it was a question of booking a room and, you know, setting a time that worked for everyone, and whether it be within our group or with cross groups, making sure that everyone had a good time. And one of the pieces going forward, I think, is comfort level. And from a hybrid standpoint, obviously, I do think, and I really hope genuinely, that whether it be Zoom or Teams or what have you, that we embrace that and use that face-to-face technology. Obviously, I don't think if we're all in the office that people are going to start teaming, you know, your neighbor. Hopefully you'll get up and actually say hello, and we'll remember that we can have those physical connections. But I think it's going to be interesting to try and implement these slowly, because everyone's not going to feel comfortable doing the same thing. So if it's going out to a restaurant or having an ice cream social or trivia night, whatever it might be, I think for a while it's going to be, as you noted, Amanda, asking for feedback, trying to flesh out what people would like to do and where their comforts lie. And then with that, trying to, I guess, hit different things so that in totality, you still maintain that connection within your group, within your building, within your floor, however you're structured. And so you're not forcing people to do things to maintain that culture that is otherwise uncomfortable to them.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. I'll just add, I think just even the way the question's worded, you know, what rituals, what would they look like going forward? I think we need to find new ways of doing this, right? I don't think the old techniques are necessarily going to work in the future. And you know, one example is at Akamai, it's all about communication, right? We do a lot of all hands meetings and departmental meetings, and we always have traditionally. I think when I think about those in the future, that will continue. There'll be a component that will be remote, but I also think a lot of people will still want to come in for those events, and I think there'll definitely be a social tie-in to those when they do occur. Whereas previously we're all in the office every day, we don't need that. But I think in the future we'll definitely need to have that, you know, either before or after the events. And I also think in our new headquarters and our other locations, you know, we've built all these collaboration areas, these break areas, which typically, I think in the past were not highly utilized. But I can definitely see in the future when people do come in, they're going to want to engage with people. They're going to want to have human contact. I think there'll be an increased focus on those spaces. And I don't frankly know that those spaces are really ready to support that. So we need to do some work internally to figure out what changes we need to make there, or do we need more of them going forward?
Now, I know Andrea mentioned that doing trivia night was a big hit. What for all of you though, what are things that you tried that either were surprisingly successful or maybe the opposite? You thought they'd be a hit and they were kind of a dud. Amanda?
Yeah, Liberty tried a bunch of things. I wasn't involved specifically in coming up with these ideas, but we did trivia as well, talent shows, recipe books. But when I was thinking about this, I kept coming back to the idea of the photos that are displayed on our homepage. It's a small thing, but at the beginning of the pandemic, they reached out and asked for people to share photos of their work from home experience. So every time you open your browser, you see photos of, it's called Photos at Liberty. So it's like pictures of dogs wearing glasses, cats across keyboards, babies wearing headsets, that sort of stuff. And I have a 5 and 2-year-old at home throughout all this. And these photos just really made me always smile and feel seen and supported. Like it really made it okay to have your life be a part of your job and even celebrate it. So gallery's still active today. I must not be the only one that feels that way. Although since schools have reopened, it's mostly cats and dog content now.
John, how about you?
So for us, the wellness days have been a spectacular success. People absolutely love that, and they've been so successful that I work for the Chief Human Resources Officer. I don't think those are going to be going away. I think there's going to be an expectation that those will continue long term. So those have been a fantastic success. We've done the trivia, certainly with my department. We did it for a while, and it was very well received. I think it started to filter out after a while and become less interesting. I won one week, so that I really kind of lost focus after I won one of them finally. So all those virtual events have been really challenging I think to maintain over time, right? So I think we're all having that experience. One thing we did that didn't go so well was we tried to put in this concept of a Focus Friday where you wouldn't have 11 WebEx meetings. We started that, and it was maybe successful for a couple of weeks, and then the meeting, then there was 2 meetings on a Friday, and then it was 4, and it just went back to normal. So we are trying that again this summer, but that was a good idea. I thought that just reality, it wasn't implemented, and it wasn't effective. So we're going to try it again. I think the concept is great. It's just hopefully we can achieve it this time, because it wasn't successful last time.
That's great, thank you. Another thing we wanted to ask all of you is, you're from very different organizations, is who actually is responsible for either establishing or promoting or encouraging the growth of culture? Sometimes it's an HR function, but clearly not all of the time. Let's see, Andrea, maybe.
Sure. So, Joe, sorry, did not mean to cut you off. What I was going to say is at Wolf, we do have obviously firm-wide culture that is either on the HR level or different initiatives that are started. But then within each of our practice groups, so we're grouped by technology because we're a purely IP firm. Each of our practice groups has its own deputy, and so when we look to, I would say it's probably more on a micro level than a macro for the firm-wide, but that's what we're trying to do on the daily or monthly or weekly basis. So it's either within our own group or trying to partner with our, culture deputy match in that particular practice group, or more than 1 or 2. There were some fitness tracker, walking, racing, and events that happened to see who could do the most steps. It's really fascinating to see. So that's kind of how we function at the firm.
Amanda?
Yeah, so obviously Liberty Mutual is big. So we have entire departments devoted to things like employee experience and developing culture building and career building programs and initiatives. But at the more micro scale, at the department level, we don't really have anyone who's ultimately responsible, although we do have various opportunities to get involved, like I did on the culture initiative. I also have been on the fund committee in the past to plan the holiday party, involved in mentoring groups, things like that. So everyone has a chance to step up. But I'd say kind of through the training that we did, it really helped to show that we're all ultimately accountable for the culture in the end, impacting it every day with how we're approaching our work and interacting with one another.
John?
Yeah, and so as I mentioned previously, we don't have a real formal process for managing this. I think it's frankly probably something we need to consider implementing. Right now, it's a group of HR individuals, myself running real estate. We have an HR VP representative, and then also we have a VP of inclusion and diversity. So we're kind of the de facto folks that work on this from time to time, but it hasn't been a really focused effort. And my view is that that's going to be something we need to work on, especially when we move to more mobility. I think it's going to have to be more mindful and programmatic in terms of how we cultivate and retain culture going forward with the new workplace strategy.
Karen, I just wanted to check in with you to see if there's any follow-up questions that we want to ask.
I actually had one question for John. John, with the sort of allowances that you guys gave, so home setup and wellness, were they one-time events, or how are you handling new employees who come in and maybe want to get a new monitor? Or
Right. So our approach on that is what we're considering is, like I said, we're developing a global work from home program, and our intent is to provide the allowance for new hires at the time of their hire. That's our plan. It hasn't been ultimately blessed yet, but that's our recommendation as a committee. So so folks who join, whether they choose a fully remote, a hybrid, or a in-office experience, we would provide them with that home setup allowance.
Thank you. And there were no audience questions. If anyone has questions, feel free to send them through and we can try and weave them into the conversation.
John, this is a question for you specifically. I know we've all heard about people had a really hard time adjusting to working remotely, but did you see any people surprisingly really flourished while doing remote work, either, demographically, geographically, anything like that?
Flourished. Yeah, I did. I think it's more on an individual basis. I had an employee in Europe that we were faced with a crisis and really just rose to the challenge, right? So that was probably more about his ability and his reaction to the challenges, and he was willing to dive into something that he had absolutely no experience dealing with, but he wanted to help, and that was a success story. Unfortunately, in my world, I probably have the opposite, right? Folks that are frontline service providers, facility technicians. There's a whole group of service level individuals in the organization that really struggled, frankly, when we went to remote work, right? What do I do now? And I should say probably the leadership of those teams responded really well by giving those individuals a sense of purpose, giving them different roles, giving them an opportunity to still contribute. So I can't really pick out a specific role or folks in a specific geo that flourished as opposed to others, but I was lucky generally that everyone was able to adjust and succeed. But we did have some success stories, but I think those were based on their own individual motivation and skills.
That's great. Amanda, this question is for you. Since Liberty Mutual is such a big company, we have to assume that there were a number of new hires made while remote. And can you tell us a little bit about how you kind of made new hires feel included and come to understand the culture of the company?
Yeah, well, I can't speak to all the company as a whole. I wasn't personally involved in onboarding anyone over the last year, but it was something we really contemplated when we were doing our culture work through this time period. So we were trying to devote all this time and energy to educating our department to get to this new innovative place. And we knew we'd ultimately be evolving over this coming year with retirements and upcoming changes. So really making sure to try and carry our work forward by including culture in the objectives. So it's on the top of everyone's minds, including all of our coursework in the onboarding materials for anyone who will join the company or join our department. And then anyone who enters a new management role will be invited to join those existing manager huddles and be able to kind of pick up on the content and the culture that way.
John, how about Akamai? I'm imagining you probably did some hiring as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you, anecdotally, I did hire someone last summer in a fully remote status. And it was really challenging. Akamai is a very programmatic way of onboarding employees, where they go out and they schedule, 25 meetings for you to actually sit down and more often than not meet people in the headquarters, the people you work with. In this case, we had to do that all virtually. So for me as the manager, I had to spend a lot more time in that onboarding process than I would have if we had still been in the office, where the person got a schedule from my admin, and you go here, here, and here, and have these meetings. I realized pretty early that I had to be a part of a lot of those meetings, at least to do a virtual introduction and explain to the person that the individual was meeting with the role and why they were starting with the company and what my vision was for the role. So again, another one. I don't have a magic bullet here. I think from my own experience, it took a lot of work, and it was a very curated process, much more than it would have been had we still been in an office environment where there could be some sort of informal introduction or collaboration. The person struggled. I will tell you, it was really difficult onboarding, right? Because he misses the social interaction and the ability even to meet the colleagues within the real estate organization that he's still never seen in person. So as far as the regional hires, we haven't seen a lot of problems with that on the business unit level, or maybe it's happening, but they haven't asked us to help, which is what they usually do when there's a problem. But I think, the company did hire quite a few people last year during the pandemic. Not as much as normal, though. I don't know, other people experienced this. So we didn't see the attrition that we would typically in 2020 because of the pandemic. So we certainly lost some people, but not nearly as much as we would in a normal year.
So I know, John, you showed us in your presentation some pretty extensive surveying, measuring culture, but maybe Amanda and Andrea, if you can tell us if your companies do anything to either track or measure the success or otherwise of culture.
Yeah, I can take that. Liberty does do a lot of formal measuring. More broadly, Liberty's talent organization conducts the Employee Opinion Survey annually, which is about employee satisfaction and culture more globally. And then in response to COVID, we get monthly pulse surveys now, which monitor how employees are feeling at that moment in time. So we can see the trends there. And then, as I mentioned in my presentation, we have an annual culture survey at the department level, which helps inform our leaders of our strengths and opportunities.
So within, I would say on a firm-wide level, there's a lot of committees and initiatives that they're running, and oftentimes there will be surveys to coincide with those if there are particular issues. I know we've had ones relative to going back. I'm just trying to think of some of the other firm-wide ones, but we are soliciting feedback on a whole host of things relative to things that we're doing, programs we're doing, things that we could be doing differently, which is great. So they are definitely looking for feedback. I know specific to culture, we've asked or been asked on both a firm-wide and then a group-wide level. Personally, in terms of trying to stay connected, it's more holistic feedback that we've tried to ask, although there are the formal surveys, but just trying to measure the pulse of the different activities we've tried, which folks find successful, what they'd like to do. So it kind of runs the gamut between more formal inquiries that are tracked and then less formal check-ins.
And then I know, John, you mentioned that the people who are kind of in facilities, for example, would probably have been most impacted because the nature of the work that they do is in person, and it's really hard to work remote. Amanda, did you see, was that similar for you, or were there other types of functions or people that just seemed the most impacted?
I'd say I don't work directly with our facilities team, but they are part of real estate, and I would say the same happened for us. I know we also had the cafeteria that was impacted. Yeah, I think the people in those roles probably felt it the most. But everyone, of course, had their own issues at hand throughout it, whether they were home alone or home with 3 kids. It was difficult, but we all, come at it with kind of a sense of camaraderie in the end. I think we made it through together.
Very true.
Yeah.
Let's see, Karen, do you have any follow-up, or do you have any audience questions?
One follow-up question, Amanda and Andrea, you both mentioned how the sort of technology and everyone being on the screen can be a bit of an equalizer. Going forward, are your groups or your companies talking about how to keep that connectivity so you don't end up with the disparity of the people in the room and the people remote?
I don't think anything's been formally discussed, but I think once we do have that issue start to arise, I could see us leaning more towards being on the screen even when in person, just because we're so geographically dispersed.
Yeah, I do think some of it is going to continue for the same reason Amanda mentioned, where we're not all in the same office. I don't know that we've formally talked about within like group meetings, for example, if everyone can't be a part, although it would not surprise me if we did something similar where some folks were on the screen and others weren't. But I think this question is a really lovely acknowledgement of how things have changed, and just talking about, a year ago when you had these group meetings and people were absent, we weren't looking necessarily, maybe sometimes, but you didn't necessarily automatically say, oh, I could put them on Teams or I could use Zooms, let's have a teleconference and have that FaceTime. And we were really using teleconferencing much more heavily, I would say, across the board. And so I really genuinely do hope that this continues as a way to be able to see folks, because I do think that it brings us all together, it humanizes us, and it, how many times have you had conversations years with people that you never knew what they looked like or what they were? And I think that this has created a very unique window into each other's lives, whether or not people think that's good, bad, or indifferent. But I do hope that it continues in the way that you're talking about. And it'll have to see, I don't know if it's going to be formalized. It could just be an organic thing that happens, but it'll be interesting to see how it's leveraged going forward when we do have folks in person in the office and when there's elective that's not there. Or with hybrid, even if there are individuals in the office, they may not match up. So the reality of being together may not be exactly the same, even if we wanted it to.
I think, Andrea, you may have had the last word, unless, John, did you have thoughts on that as well?
Oh, well, I do. I think it's someone identified a really challenging issue. I don't think there's an easy answer for this one either. Now we're on the same plane. It's pretty easy. I think I've been telling our leadership it's going to be much more challenging when we come back in some capacity. And all of these meetings are going to be 50% in a room and 50% remote. And it becomes an inclusion issue because people that are remote, if they're going to have a secondary experience, it becomes an engagement issue. I can't voice an opinion here because no one's paying attention to me because I'm remote. I think it's a really important issue and one that we're all going to deal with. And we've been acknowledging it at the leadership level, and we've been telling directors and managers it's going to be a lot harder to manage, we think, in a hybrid model than it was in traditional. Well, if everybody comes in and sits around me, it's easy to manage, right? That's easier for me. Well, good luck with that if that's your style. I don't think that's going to work in the future, right? So we've been acknowledging that we need to do a lot of work in change management and training in this area for leaders because it's going to be much more difficult, I think, for all of us to manage teams in the future than maybe it was in the past.
That's great. Thank you very much. I think we're just about at the end of the hour. Catherine and Aaron, do you have a wrap up?
Yeah, I'll jump back on, Janet, and just close the program with a big thank you to you and Karen for all your work on this program, and to our panelists, John and Amanda and Andrea, for sharing their insights and their thoughts on culture in their organizations, and reminding us that it's really about maintaining those connections and maybe trying something new. I see a lot of trivia nights in everyone's future. Just want to remind everybody that there's a brief survey that will follow this, and Aaron and I would appreciate very much if you could take a couple of minutes and share your feedback. That's always welcome. And thank you all for joining this afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
great rest of your day.
Thank you.